Okay, so this is going to be the live session for Shading and Lighting 2. We're in week 3. So just give me a second here. I'm just waiting for the stream to buffer so I can see it. Oh, yeah, it's up. Sweet. All right, I don't know who we've got with us today, but we're going to just dive in here and do this. So let's bring up the class. Oh, that's the wrong class. Okay, so uh, week 3, we have a couple different things going on. Now, obviously, yesterday everyone in this class had turned in their discussion, which is really just kind of like talking about material properties, how surfaces work, what a reflection is, what a transmission is, what an emission is. Now, some of these things we haven't built in Maya. We have been building reflective surfaces for the last couple of weeks, but we haven't really done much with transmissions. So we are going to focus on that today. We'll get into 3.3 for a little bit. And I do want to talk a little bit and almost kind of bridge what you guys were going over in 3.1, which was a lot of like how things work in the real world. I do want to just do a couple examples of relating some of these real things that we were seeing from the videos and just talk about how we could recreate that inside of Maya. So I'm just going to go into 3.3 first and just kind of have this open so because we are going to jump in here probably in the last half of the lecture. And I just want to do a demo with you guys and explain some of the things we're going to be working on, tonight, tomorrow, through the weekend. But basically you are getting into glass. So we finally hit the point where instead of you just making solid opaque objects that are that have textures that reflect light, we're finally ready to start getting into some situations where we want light to pass through something, and that's going to be a transmission. So glass, obviously, light passes through it. That's why you can see through it. There's windows, glass bottles. We have a bunch of gemstones you're going to be working on as well. And you guys are going to have a lot of creative freedom this week, and you'll get to decide what type of lighting setups you want to use. You could go in there and start opening and closing doors and windows and adding different accent colors. You might decide you want to go back and change some of your textures. So the project's going to keep evolving, and you may decide, as you get deeper into the activity this weekend, that based on some decisions you've made this week, it might mean you want to go back to week 2 and tweak a few things. Like some of the textures may not look right with some of the lights you have. So there's a little bit of an evolution you're going to be going through where you may decide you want to go back and make adjustments on previous weeks. But it's kind of similar to last week. You're just turning in a render, meeting all your requirements, turning in your Maya file, and that's kind of it, honestly. So let's jump right into it. Okay, what I'm going to do first, before we get into that project, is I'm just going to set up a couple really simple things here inside of Maya. We're just going to make like a polyplane. Let's do our polysphere. Let's set this guy up. And let's also do, let's see. I think I'm going to do a helix as well, because I might want this for a couple examples when we get to transmissions. All right, so I'm making a polyhelix, and I'm just going to go down here and just modify a couple things with different subdivisions on it, just so it's a little bit smoother. Let's do 40. And this guy, well, I was going to boost that up a little bit because that's pretty low poly at the moment. There we go. That looks pretty decent. All right, sweet. There we go. So we have a couple objects here, and what we're going to run through real quick is just a real fast demo on some of the different reflection properties. We're going to blitz through this pretty quick because we've been talking about this, pretty much the last couple of weeks, but I do want to run through this super fast. So for a review, I definitely need a light in here. That would actually help a lot. Let's just grab something quick from the preset browser. Let's do, I did this one earlier in my other group. We're going to do the I guess the Griffith Observatory, or not. What? Oh, there we go. Now it's there. That was weird. There. I don't know what that weird warning was. Here's our Griffith Observatory. I'm just going to boost this guy up a little bit. And we'll set up a camera just so we can render it as well. So we're doing all sorts of things that we've done before on the previous classes. So we'll do a resolution gate, bring this in, and just kind of look down at these guys. That should be good. Okay. Perfect. There we go. So I've got a couple things set up. We're just going to kick off a really simple render. That's actually kind of pretty. Isn't that nice? We've got one of our Pixar dome lights from the preset browser. We have some really cool lighting coming in. Beautiful sun. Really digging that. And we're just going to throw a couple of materials on here and just kind of run through some examples of things that you guys were doing from 3.1. And by the way, going through the discussions today was really cool because you guys all had a bunch of really good examples of different types of surface properties. And I'm kind of curious what you guys thought about that whole activity as far as like trying to like, almost treat it like a scavenger hunt around your apartment where you're trying to figure out, all right, like what is a diffuse surface? What is a specular surface? What is, is this metal? Where can I run into transmissions? What is an emission surface? And for anyone here that actually is in the class that did 3.1, I am kind of curious, did you run into any materials or any objects in your house or your apartment and you were not sure what it was? Like looking at it, you actually were not sure what this would even be considered. Like you didn't know if it was reflective. You didn't know if it was like, is this a transmission? Is it a mix of two different things? Because usually a couple times a month with every group, there's always like a few objects that people post where they just legitimately have no idea if it qualifies as a reflection or a transmission. So, but they'll post it, and it's more of just like they want to know what it is they're looking at. So if you guys did have anything you were looking at home and you're not sure what it was or what it's made of, I would definitely be curious what that is. You can even post it to the discussion again if you want, and I'd like to take a look at it. Because there are a bunch of unique materials that are kind of difficult to create. So what we're going to do is let's do a bunch of reflective surfaces with this one right here first, this polysphere. And all I'm going to do is we're just going to throw a Pixar surface on it. Okay, and I'm going to do a couple things just to go over some different organization tricks. I'm going to turn off DAG objects only. And I know I've kind of hounded on you guys about keeping that thing off because I did talk about it in last month quite a bit about how you typically don't want to do this. The reason I'm turning it off right now is because if I keep DAG objects only off, while it does reveal a bunch of crap that we don't typically need to see, one thing I do like is that it does reveal the material. So I can see the Pixar surface material here without me constantly having to hop into the Hypershade all the time or the node editor. So let's just talk about a diffuse reflection. So this is going to be our example for diffuse reflection material. So what would be a diffuse reflection? Like, don't worry so much about Maya necessarily and RenderMan, but in the real world, what would we consider a diffuse reflection? So as soon as we see the word reflection, that means what? It means that there is light that is being reflected off the surface. And pretty much every material we do, even a transmissive material, like if we made this glass eventually, transmissions still also have reflections. Because like when you look at a glass bottle, it's still shiny. Oh, hey, what's up, Corey? And Andres. Good to see you guys. So like when you think of like a glass bottle, glass has reflections on the surface, like because you can see it reflecting the stuff around you, but it also has transmissions because you're physically able to see through the bottle, right? So there's two things going on. Now, if we just think of this as a diffuse reflection, so I just have my material on this, diffuse reflection just simply means that it is opaque, there's some color, and we can just pick whatever color we want. We could say the diffuse color of the surface is like we'll kind of do this little cool brownish, almost orange color from the lighting. Now, when light hits the surface, the color we're seeing reflected back to us is a diffuse reflection, is this kind of brown tone. Now, if we assume that, I know it's not white, but let's just pretend the light coming from the light source is pure white. And again, you can tell it isn't. There's like warm and cool tones in it, but let's just kind of pretend for a second. If we have absolute white light coming in, hitting the surface, when we see this brown to us, like when our eyes pick up the brown, what that tells me is that brown, this part of the visible light spectrum, which white is a combination of all the visible light, only the brown parts of the spectrum, like reds and a little bit of green, made it back to our eyes. There's a lot of colors that were absorbed into the surface, like blues, that never made it to our eyes. They were basically absorbed into the surface. The light energy was converted into heat, and then we never saw it. And so interesting example of that, which was kind of talked a little bit about in some of the videos. I know there were a lot of videos in 3.1. Let's pretend we think of this as a really dark surface. So growing up, like when I was at school, when I was really young at my elementary school, they had a playground in the back. And I remember one of the years they paved the whole thing over the summer. And then the next year we came back, it was like the pavement in that play yard was extremely hot. Like you could barely walk across it during recess without burning your feet. And the main difference there was because the fresh pavement was a lot darker. And so you guys know just from stepping on like dark pavement, you put your hand on like a car that has a black paint job on it, those get extremely hot. Because even if let's pretend this is our really dark car paint where it's almost pure black or like a really dark like charcoal gray. We have white light coming in. At this point, almost all of the light is absorbed, right? Because we're not getting any white back. It's black. It's not like we're seeing this and we're getting like all the white light bouncing back to us. The white light hits this surface, and just because of the way the molecules are constructed on the surface, almost all the white light's absorbed. We get like a tiny bit reflected back to us, like a fraction of what it was initially, and all that light that's absorbed into the material that we don't see, hence why it's dark, gets converted to heat. And that's again why when you put your hand on something like this during a hot day, it will burn your hand. You're seeing the conversion of light energy into heat energy. And anytime you have a surface that is very bright, which is the opposite issue or effect, this is almost all the white light is reflected back to us. So it's very bright. Not much of that light is converted into heat because it's not absorbed, and so the surface is a lot cooler, or not as hot as it would be if it was dark. So it's always just about transfer of energy. So a diffuse surface really just comes down to how the light is absorbed into that reflective surface. How much of it's absorbed through value. And of course, there are different types of frequencies with color and light waves, and that's what gives you the different types of tones with the reflection surface. Now, the other thing that's really important with a diffuse reflection, which I did talk about quite a bit in the videos. Oh, hey, Cameron. Welcome to the live session. So the other thing we talk about with diffuse reflections is also what it means for the specular reflection. Now, it's a little confusing because when the videos, when we talk about this with physics, diffuse reflection and specular reflection seem like they're very different things. So like when you see diffuse reflection in the real world, the way they talk about it, they're talking about it as being a surface that is very rough and bumpy, that just diffuses the light so it looks very dry, right? But drier surfaces, even like stone, still have in RenderMan what's called a specular reflection. So diffuse reflection in RenderMan is strictly just a color. We actually still need to do this guy, even if that surface is very dry. And I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to build this just like I was showing you guys in a lot of my videos. So what do I do pretty frequently with my specular reflections? I did like the same thing almost every time. We boost this up a little bit. Now you'll notice how touchy this thing is just by barely bumping up that face color. See how like you don't have to move it up at all? And it's like immediately looks way too reflective. It's like there's a clear coat on it. It's almost starting to get into that territory where it's like, is it like a mirror? Is there like some type of like weird polished coating on the outside? So we're going to leave it pretty low, somewhere around here. And then I'm going to boost up the edge color. Now, do you guys remember what the edge color does. Like, what was the difference between these two? While you guys think about that, because you should know, or you might think you know. Even if you don't think you know, you might, if you think you have like an idea, shout it out. Well, don't shout it out because I can't hear you, but type it out. What's the difference between those two? While you guys are brewing on that, I'm going to move the roughness attribute. So we're going to come back to edge color. So low roughness is really tight reflections, right? See how it's almost like a mirror. You can see it's a lot of clarity. I can see the clouds, everything. Very, very crisp. Higher roughness will go halfway up. What's happening to the reflection? The specular reflection is still there. In RenderMan, it's still called a specular reflection because it's the area of the material we're in. But because we've blurred it so much, if you kind of relate this back to the videos that we were watching from 3.1, they were calling this a diffuse reflection, right? Because they were saying, oh, a diffuse reflection is when it scatters light everywhere. This looks like a diffuse reflection, even though we're doing it in the specular reflection. Yeah, you're totally right, Andres. So this is basically your matte effect right here, right? Where it's like not matte, it's glossy or low roughness. This is a high matte, very rough surface. Satin's kind of in between here somewhere too, right? You're kind of getting a mix. Everything falls in this range. Now, to come back to the edge color, what the edge color does is this is what gives you a stronger specular reflection, regardless if it's sharp or blurry. This is just the softness or sharpness of it. The intensity needs to change as it wraps around the surface. That's where the edge color changes. So if I bring this up, if you watch... let me actually see if I can get a cropped render on here. This one's a little tricky to see sometimes. I might have to darken the gain down. Let me turn it to black so you can see this. Okay, so see how you get a reflection here in the middle? Look on the edge right there when I bring this guy up. Can you guys see how it's like starting to get a bit more reflective on the outside? Here's off. So it's very dark. And on the outside, you get that like boost of intensity. So face and edge color is actually kind of what exactly it sounds like. This is the intensity of the reflection facing you. This is the intensity of the reflection on the edge perpendicular to you. Yep. There you go, right? So somewhere around here is kind of typically like my go-to. And I'm not saying there's always going to be a right answer. This stuff is going to change depending on if you're doing plastics and metals. There is a lot of variation, but I think a good target for you guys is pretty much every time you want to start doing a material that's a very generic, reflective material like plastics, wood, stones, things like that. Right around here is a good target. And the only thing you're really defining after that is once you have these set up and you're kind of happy with like how bright the reflection looks, like I'll turn the color back on again. After that, it's just a matter of like, do you want the surface to be dry and matte, where it's like very old, old and beat up? There's some age to it. And texturally, if you put your hand on this, it should be very rough and like it should feel kind of gritty. Or do you guys want to go for something that's a lot more polished, where you just by looking at this, you can tell like it would feel like it's smooth. We know what that looks like, right? So it's very smooth now. Okay, so those are all reflection surfaces, diffuse reflection, and actually, let me just create an actual diffuse reflection. This would probably be closer to a real diffuse reflection. Let me do this again as what we might call a specular reflection surface, according to like the physics videos. So we're going to do this one more time, a new material. I don't know why it went down there, but that's great. I'm going to move this way up. Oh, that's annoying. It might rearrange it if I turn that on and off again. Oh, there we go. So we're going to do specular reflection. All right, there we go. That's on there. So if we want to consider this a specular reflection, that would be a surface that is very shiny according to physics, right? So we can kind of do it the same way. I might do a different color this time, but let's do maybe like a fun little pink or something. So the color is part of it, but a specular reflection really just means we still do this, we just happen to keep this lower. That's simply it. All right, so now we have this guy right here. We had our diffuse, and so it's very easy to swap these out. I'll click, and because I have the DAG objects only turned off, I can just swap out materials by doing what we're doing in the Hypershade. So click, right click on diffuse, assign material to selection, assign material to selection, and I can just go back and forth. So if you guys do like this method a little bit better than going into Hypershade, you're more than welcome to jump in here and expose the materials that way. And that's our specular reflection. And specular reflections also would work as a metal typically. Metals are a little bit different. Let's actually do a metal real quick. So a couple of you guys actually did submit metals for your discussions for 3.1. So a metal surface, like right now, this doesn't feel like metal. This looks like plastic, right? It looks like a plastic or like a marble. Let's do metal real fast. This is a little different. I'm going to click. We're going to do this again, Pixar surface. Let's do, what type of metal do you guys want to do? I'll give you guys a second here. It's a little bit of a lag between me and you, but I'm going to let you guys tell me what type of metal you want. If I get a lot of answers, I'll just kind of pick one. What are you guys feeling? No pressure. It's like radio silence. Like, oh god, I have to pick a metal. This is killing me. All right, let's do more of like a copper. Okay. All right, I'm just gonna turn DAG off and on just so it kind of rearranges my list again. So I'm doing copper. It's already on there. You can see there's our copper material. And what I'm gonna do is pull up reference for copper. Let's just find a really good example. Now, RenderMan does have a lot of presets, obviously, where you can just pull this stuff, from their preset browser. But I do want to get you guys comfortable where you understand how to recreate this stuff from scratch. Even if you're not doing it like 100% physically correct, you can get something really close to this. And I bet we can do that right now. Perfect. Yeah, we all like it. Copper's awesome. I've always this is sort of unrelated, but I've always wanted to have like copper countertops. So one day. All right, so let's try to do this thing. So I've got the copper material on there. You can see it's right here. We're gonna try to get a good color match. Now I'm gonna show you the way we might do it if we were thinking about this like the other materials we just did. I could go to diffuse and pick that color, right? So let's do that. Let's try to get something pretty close. I'm gonna click. We'll go in here, maybe let's boost that up. It's a little yellow, right? So I need to go a little warmer. Maybe a little warmer than that. A little less saturation possible. Let's bring that up a little bit. I'm just doing some basic color matching right now. What do you guys think? It's getting pretty close, right? All right, so we kind of get the right tone. Now, it's got a reflection on it because you can tell it's not like really glossy, but there's a little bit of a nice little polish to it. So let's put that on there. I'm just building it exactly like we did just earlier with the other one. And I want to show you an issue we're going to run into. Let's even crank it up a little bit. Okay. This is what we might think of as being copper. Now it's a little too sharp, but when you look at this, does this actually feel like metal? Or does something feel just a little off? And you know this is probably like, if I'm asking you this, like the answer is yes, something a little bit off with this thing. To me, when I look at this, this looks more like there's a plastic ball that just happens to be the color of copper, but it still looks like it's plastic. It doesn't look like it's metal, right? There is something a little odd with this thing. And this is really where you start getting into like understanding how reflections work with the material. So here's metal. We have to remember with metal, the color isn't with the diffuse reflections. Metal's color is coming from the primary specular reflections, this area right here. Because normally we're not changing the color. Every time I've had you guys do other materials with your specular reflections, I'm just like, Keep it dark gray, keep it light gray, play around with the roughness, and you get stuff that kind of looks like that. But that's not how metal works. Metal is interesting because this is where it's generating the color. So watch this. We're going to kill the diffuse gain completely. Let's kill all this stuff, actually. It's dead, right? I still have the color in here, but because I took the gain down, this thing isn't doing anything. It's essentially off. No color, okay? I'm going to put this color in face color. It's not going to be gray this time. I can pick it from my list here. These are all other colors I've picked at some point recently. Look at that already. And all I did is put a color in there. I didn't do anything. That is a huge difference, right? And then, now obviously if it needs to be brighter, I can still do that. I can actually get this guy in here. I want the edge color to have a similar effect. And let's just boost this up so it's lighter, right? Look how close we're getting to this thing now, right? Now that, to me, doesn't that look like way more accurate to a metal compared to what we had before? Right? And it's now, let's say if we're doing this one right here, like these little, the different rods right here, right? So the piping, they're pretty sharp. And this actually might be a good match for that with like the roughness. But some of these guys, like right here, you know, actual copper being mined out of the earth, some of them can be a little bit rougher. So maybe the only difference is like the color's right, but what if we just brought the roughness up? And you can see how now we're getting that more of like a diffused copper, where if you imagine like putting your hand on the surface, this one would actually feel texturally grittier, right? It's a rougher quality. This is smoother. So it's kind of interesting sometimes when you start to like, when you just get used to the idea of like, okay, for a metal, the colors in the specular reflections. For a normal, like your non-metals, like your plastics, your organics, like woods, even skin, a lot of these colors here are just different shades you guys work with, and then you can go to metals by putting the color down here very easily. Oh, my stream may have just popped. Yeah, I don't know. You guys still able to see and hear me? I just watched my stream health just go down the crapper there for a second. Hopefully you guys can still see me. I think we're back. Thank you, Spectrum. All right. So we've done diffuse reflection. We did a specular reflection, which was really just changing the roughness. And then we've got metal for copper. And it's so easy to change this. You can do gold. You can go in there and like, gold is like, you know, over this way, right? It's just a matter of changing the hue, and then you're starting to get into golds. So it's pretty cool. But again, all the colors in here. So I thought that was pretty important to show you guys that. I talked about it a little bit in the videos, but I think it's just kind of nice to like, now that you've gone through that discussion, just to sort of have that review again where we just like bring it all back and it's like, it starts to click a little bit more. It really is this easy. Now let's get into this guy. We're going to do transmissions, okay? So transmission, this is the change this week. Transmissions are completely different because remember, a reflection surface just means you're talking about light that's bouncing off the surface. So if we do something like light reflection, right? We've all seen these diagrams. I have a whole Photoshop document in some of my videos where I talk about this. This is light reflecting off the surface. That's everything we just talked about, whether it's a metal, plastic, organics, it's reflection. Just different types of reflection depending on the surface properties. But as soon as you get into light transmission, you'll notice something. Oh, this is actually a really good one right here. This is a great little document. Oh, thank you, PNG. Okay. Well, it was cool for about 2 seconds. We'll look at it right here before the alpha kicks in. Reflection bounces off. What's transmission doing? It passes through it. You guys had a bunch of really cool examples of this. In absorption, this is the diffuse reflection. That's where the color was coming from earlier when I was talking about like it being like a brown plastic or a pink plastic. That's the light absorption. Scattering is very similar to transmission. Scattering is a light that goes into the surface, and it still does exit as a transmission, but a lot of the light is scattered internally. A really good example of this is We've all done this. You know how you guys have probably had like a flashlight, or you've taken your phone flashlight and you kind of press it up against your hand and you get all those like crazy red fleshy colors when the light blasts through your fingers and the palm. That's a scatter. That's a diffuse transmission. So it's light trying to transmit through your skin, but because your skin is thick enough, it's not like glass. The light is basically bouncing around internally. It's scattering. It's still exiting out the other side of your hand, hence why you can see the red, and it's diffused. Yes, you are exactly right, Sarah. The skin is just because it's scattering is literally diffuse transmission. So you know how we were saying there's a diffuse reflection and a specular reflection, meaning it's a dry opaque surface versus a shiny opaque surface. A scatter is a dry or diffused transmission like skin or like candle wax, and then a specular transmission is glass. But they're both light trying to pass through, but they're getting caught and they're just doing different things inside the material. That's basically what's going on. So hopefully that all makes sense. I really get into this stuff too. I'm sure you can tell I get into it because I'm just like rambling on about like light rays. But it's really good for you guys to understand that this stuff is grounded in reality, because it takes the mystery out of all this stuff, and I don't want you guys to feel like every time you're in Maya you're playing a guessing game of like, what button do I hit today? Like you feel like you're always having to like learn the magic spell just to get this thing to work. Some of these things really are just how does it work in the real world. If you know how it works in the real world, you know how to recreate it in Maya. So let's do a specular transmission. Okay. And let me just rearrange that again. Okay, specular transmission. It's already on there. Perfect. I'm going to turn off my selection. Actually, we'll just click it on it over here so I can lose that selection. Okay, so specular transmission. This is completely new to you guys. I'm going to look for a new part of the material that we haven't talked about. Remember in the first week in Activity 1.1 when you guys were doing those different material presets and you had a couple, like I think on the bottom row, that were those different specular. There were different like types of transmission materials. Like there was like soap bubble, there was like a whiskey material, and I think there was, what was the other one? Frosted glass, I think. There was like a couple of them. Those are transmissions. Now, I don't know if you guys went looking through the material and what they were doing, but if you actually look at the preset like soap bubble or glass, if you can look through them, you'll figure out how they're constructed, and you can actually reverse engineer it and then build it yourself. So for example, let's do glass real quick. Now, if you kind of scan through the material and come down to glass right here, you're going to notice that eventually you're going to see an area called glass. And also look, by the way, there's some other words that look very familiar from one of those images we just saw, scatter. We're going to come into this in a little bit. So here's glass. So let's say I don't know what we're doing. I'm just going to start grabbing sliders and moving them around and watching the render. And let's just do a crop just so I'm not rendering the entire viewport. Have you guys been using the crop, by the way? Like, have you guys been, when you've been doing your final renders, are you still using that and like drawing over specific objects to try to like get it working? Hopefully you have, because that will make it a lot faster for you. But let's do refraction gain. I'm just going to crank this up. What does this do? Well, something happened. It's kind of weird, right? It's trying to do something. Let's crank up reflection gain. Let's just boost that bad boy. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. And you can tell that like the material is trying to turn to glass. It's like it's so close to working, but you can tell there's just something a little off about it, right? And I'm going to bring the roughness down. So this is like immaculate glass. There's no variation. This is like the cleanest glass you could possibly create, like right out of the factory, worth millions. And it still doesn't look right. So the key to glass is you have to remember that when you start with the material, what is the only section of the material that's turned on by default? Every time you make a new material, it's not completely off. There is one thing always enabled. Diffuse reflections, right? It's always that gray color. So think about this. If you turn the glass on, did we disable this from running? We didn't. So what you're seeing is when you enable glass, when you think about what glass is made of, glass is only light passing through it, it's only transmissions, and it's only the reflection off the surface of the glass. Does glass have diffuse reflections? Because remember, diffuse reflections is like looking at your laptop. Diffuse reflection is like the gray plastic. It's like the keys. It's the little Alienware, below your laptop screen. It's the table your laptop's on. Those are diffuse reflections. Glass doesn't do that. Glass isn't a texture or an opaque surface. And so if we know that, we know we got to get rid of this immediately. And as soon as you remove all the diffuse, look what happens. See how it looks better? That gray from this area was mixing. The gray diffuse reflection was mixing with the glass, and you were kind of getting this weird material that was like in between both. It wasn't really glass, and it wasn't really gray, like a gray matte material either. It was like mixing it like paint. But as soon as we kill the diffuse reflection and you just crank these guys up, it's immediately working like glass. That's it. It looks amazing, right? And now we have this thing where we have roughness again, and we kind of know what roughness is because we knew what this was up here. Roughness was how blurry or sharp the reflection is. So this is going to be a giant shocker to you guys. What do you think roughness is going to do to the glass? It's going to blur the glass. Just like it does with up there, it does the same thing here. If you boost this thing up, just watch what the reflections do. See? What are we getting now? See how it's kind of slowly turning into frosted glass? Because I'm telling the glass it's rougher. The reflection on the outside is rough, and glass is kind of interesting because normally with a diffuse reflection, when it's rough, it's just like the outside looks rough, but because you're actually seeing light pass through it, when you get a transmission that gets rough, even the stuff behind it looks blurry. So that's when you start getting into this effect with frosted glass, where things past the glass also look like they're kind of out of focus. And it's kind of interesting too because you can put textures on this stuff and get really interesting effects. Like we're only moving a slider, but once you guys start getting into like more complicated projects and you start getting into like Substance Painter and other types of softwares, you're going to be able to do things like this where you can define how rough it is in certain sections with a black and white texture. Or adding like raindrops and water condensation buildup and areas where there's like bumpiness to it. These are all things you can do once you know how to set up the basic glass material. It's just a matter of putting textures in the right section over here. Now, if I keep going up, it's just going to diffuse it more and more. Eventually, it gets kind of like really blurry, and it's really just overly rough. But somewhere around here is pretty cool. And then if I want to give it a color, we have this thing called refraction color because we know there's colored glass. I can just click on this thing and we just do something to it. Let's do green, right? So we're going to click in here. We're going to try to make a Heineken green helix for whatever reason. So we're going to pick this. We'll crank it up. Heineken green somewhere around there-ish. I'm just kind of guessing. And we have green colored glass. So it's pretty cool. And it's a bunch of interesting things too that kind of happen with this is when you're defining the refraction color, you're basically saying when the light passes through the material to hit the camera that some of it's being absorbed and the only light passing through is the green range of color. Now you'll notice that the color I picked here doesn't really look like what we're getting in the render. Like this is a little lighter, this is a bit darker. And the reason for that is because of the thickness of the material. And one of the best examples of this is like a bottle of Coke. So this is probably the simplest thing to kind of relate this to. So let's say you have a 2-liter bottle of Coke. This looks black, right? Like that refraction color, like you can't even see through it. So if I was doing Coca-Cola in a 2-liter in Maya, like I would just like keep that thing way down. I'd make the plastic bottle on the outside, but really the liquid itself is almost completely black just because of how thick it is. But if you spill Coca-Cola on the tabletop, or you spill Mountain Dew in the tabletop, right? What happens to the soda? It's not black. I hope the hell it isn't black. If you guys are drinking black Coke when it's spilled on a counter, that's you got to dump that immediately. That's tar. Coke on a table is a lot thinner, and it kind of has that light brownish color to it, almost like what you're getting here in the middle of some of these images right here, because light can pass through it because it's a lot thinner. So if you ever run into an issue where you're fighting with the thickness of the glass and you can't quite get the color to look right, click on the color. Know that you can always lighten it and pull back saturation. This was, let's say we wanted the color to look like this. This is what we want it to look like. We'll pretend we're color picking from like a reference photo, right? And this is what it's doing here in the render. We know it's not right, but just be open to it. Like, all right, it's not working. It's too dark, right? Let's lighten it up. We're just going to click. Come on. We're going to go up in value to lighten it. And I might pull back saturation a little bit. And you can see by doing that, eventually, even though this looks like a very like pastel color, it's still really rich in the render. So the color isn't always like a perfect one-to-one. It's just because you're seeing that difference in thickness. That's it. And as long as you are aware of that, it's still very easy to get the right look. It just might take a little, troubleshooting with this guy. But as long as you're watching the render and the lighting's pretty decent, you'll eventually figure it out. So there we go. All right. And the last thing I'm going to show you guys real quick is a diffuse transmission. This will be our last bag of tricks. This kind of gets a little bit into next week, but I really do want to talk about this because you guys were also learning about this in the discussion. Let's kill it. All right, let's do it one more time. Boom, Pixar surface. This will be diffuse transmission. Let's just reset that again. There we go. I think it's already on there. Perfect. We're going to enable it one more time. Crop. You guys know the drill. Diffuse. There we go. We're back here. All right. So now immediately we get to diffuse transmission. You can mix diffuse reflection and diffuse transmission, but let's say we're going to do something like, probably the easiest one is wax. You guys are actually doing candle wax in your projects. This is going to be a really good example because we're basically going to be recreating something you're doing actually this weekend. Not this weekend, sorry, that's next week, but how do we do candle wax? So when you get to the point where light's going to scatter, usually you don't need to worry about diffuse reflections. You can kind of get it to work solely with scattering. So what I'm going to do is kill this completely. We're going to remove diffuse reflections. We're going to do everything with diffuse transmissions. So now, this one's not as easy to find because it doesn't really label it as diffuse transmissions, but you're going to see an area called subsurface, also known as subsurface scattering. So we're going to turn this, open this area up. You can see there's a lot of sliders that are kind of similar to things we've seen before. Gain is like our intensity. We have a color attribute. A few things we don't know about quite yet, but we'll get into that. And we have different types of ways it calculates subsurface scattering. Now, subsurface scattering is probably going to be, along with glass, one of the most intense, difficult things to calculate. And it's very, very difficult to master, especially for anyone that gets into character and creature, like character modeling. Getting realistic skin is extremely difficult because we all know what it looks like, and even if we don't know how to create it, we sure as hell know how to critique it. And you can spot really bad skin CG from a mile away. I'm sure you guys have seen plenty of movies where you can tell there's like a CG stand-in or like a double, and like the skin, just something feels really off about it. It's either too gray and lifeless, like they don't have like the red tones figured out quite right, or there's like a weird plasticky kind of effect to it, and you're like, this just doesn't look right. That's the issue with skin. It's a lot of work to get it to look right. But we're going to do a candle wax, which is a hell of a lot easier. So we're going to do exponential path traced, just like you're going to do next week on a project. Now, I'm just swapping it over. All that does is just change the way it calculates how the light scatters, but we're not going to get too deep into it. I'm just going to crank it up, and I want you guys to watch. Let me actually redo the render, because sometimes when you first turn this on, you have to kind of start and stop it. Okay, we are going to do, let's do a different type of color for the candle wax. Let's do like a little bit of a paint, kind of a faint bluish tone. So I've kind of got this blue here, and you can see it doesn't really feel like it's doing much diffuse transmission effect. It feels very similar to like diffuse reflection at the moment. But there's a bunch of these weird other colors that are kind of scattered inside of it, like a lot of like greens and reds. It's trying to like break up the light. And what we're fighting with right now is the distance. So it's struggling to go through the surface. So what I'm going to do, let's just boost this up a little bit. And it might be tricky with this particular light because I don't know if the sunlight's strong enough for it to really show up. Let me go down. Let me try going up. It should kick in. I might have to pick the same color actually for the inside. All right, I'm going to do one thing real quick because sometimes diffuse transmissions are hard to see unless we get a light right next to it. So I'm going to just make a spherical light and just drop this guy in the middle of this thing. All right, let's just crank this dude up a little bit. Oh god, not that much. All right, let's do temperature, and we'll set it to like 3500. Actually, let me just leave it white. Yeah, we should be able to see it. Hopefully this shows up. It's a little hard to see this guy, but it's supposed to scatter through it. If I can get it like next to one of these guys, you might be able to see it. Come on, light up. It's hitting the outside. Yeah, it's kind of going through. If you look at the backside right here, see how it's passing through it a little bit right there? I bet if I made this thing thinner, you'd see it. It might be too thick. Let me try that again. It's more of like a coil now. It's pretty thin. Oh, there we go. Yeah, now it's going through. So it was actually pretty thick, and so just like if you had like a bigger hand, obviously more density means like the light doesn't pass through as easily. You know, like if a thinner material, the light can pass through it. You get more of like a fleshy look. You're actually seeing the effect right now where you're getting this kind of fleshy appearance. It's a little bit different than diffuse reflection. It's still going through it, but it's actually going through all the way and coming out the other side. So this is kind of a weird one where it's in between like a diffuse reflection and glass. Like it is a transmission, but it doesn't really look like glass. But that's kind of how that stuff works. And even with candle wax or whatever this creepy material is that we're doing, come on. Diffuse, there we go, diffuse transmission. We still want to get a reflection on the outside. So we're getting, right now what we're doing is we're getting the wax effect. Let's see if I can get this thing to, see if I can get it to bleed a little bit more. There's some settings down here where if it doesn't feel like it's spreading quite enough, you can start getting into like different like values for like the mean free path color, directionality. All these little sliders will kind of control how the light blends internally when it scatters around. This one right here is a little crazy and it's getting some interesting color effects, but you can kind of just play around with it. I have a video that gets into quite a bit of detail with all this stuff. All I'm going to do though is come up here because candle wax does have a little bit of a shine on the outside. We are going to do the same thing we did before for like our plastics. We are going to put a diffuse or a specular reflection on it. And I'm just going to give it a little bit more of a roughness because I don't want the candle wax to look too shiny. And I think what I'm going to do is just saturate this color a bit more because it's kind of dull. It's not a very exciting wax color. But I think it's working. Yeah, this thing is a pretty intense one to calculate. But if you keep letting it refine, once it starts chewing through enough samples and getting rid of a lot of the grain, you'll kind of notice that you start to get almost like that gummy-like effect to it. And there it is. So now we're getting like a wax effect where it's like a mix of our diffuse transmissions and specular reflections. So they're using both. Okay. Oh, there actually is one more thing I can show you real quick since we're kind of on the topic. And if you guys don't mind, I can go a few minutes over and I actually might show you just a little bit with the activity super quick. So the one thing we didn't talk about is an emission surface. So emission is a little different. They're kind of hard to simulate inside of RenderMan because emissions, when it's a light source, you also need that kind of a glow to go with it. So I'm going to construct this sort of like we would for the activity next week because you're going to be doing emissions in week 4. Let's add one more object in here. We're going to do a little ball. And we're going to put this in the helix, kind of like I was doing before with the light source. And let's, yeah, we'll kind of leave it at the bottom, actually. That should be fine. Okay. Now, how do I get this object to look like it is a light source? A couple ways to do it. We can either simply physically turn it to a light source. That's actually a thing you can do, by the way. I'll show you that first. Let's just hit save. And I don't know what this file's even called. Okay. It's kind of, this is outside of the scope of the class, but I just want to show you it anyway. If you click up here, there is this button here to the right of the sun called Mesh Light. I bet you guys have seen that and probably didn't realize what it was. Make geometry emissive, right? We're going to click, and then we're going to click on that button. That just turned the object to a light source, which is pretty cool. Now you watch this. If I go over here and you start clicking through the different things that are on here now, we have this thing called Pixar Black. If you keep going, look at this. Whoops, not that one. Where is it? Oh, there it is. I had to go to the Pixar Black and then click over to get to it, but it's here. There is the attributes for the mesh light. So let's just turn this on. I'm going to, well, let me turn selections off so I can see that without clicking on it. There we go. We're going to go back to it. Now this will illuminate stuff around it. Now notice how, like, so right now, like I have that little Alienware logo on my laptop that's lit up. It's like a blue, but there's a glow, right? It's emitting out. Currently we're getting the color, but it's not really emitting very far. Just like a regular light source, you can start bumping up the exposure and you'll notice that it starts to illuminate. So we could say, let's do like a fun, like a pink, something like this, right? And you can see that we're now getting pink emitted light from the light source. And I think, let me bring this down a little bit. If I make it dark enough with the exposure, you'll notice how it actually is a pink color. But it's interesting because when you make a lot of these colors bright enough, the color eventually gets so blown out that it turns to white. And you can actually see this effect over here in Maya sometimes. So let's say you pick a pink color, and if I just crank the value up above 1, watch what happens to the pink. Like this is me making, imagine you have like a pink light source, and you keep cranking up the intensity, like one of those knob intensity controls for like a room where it's like that little dial you can spin to like dim the lights up and down. I'm going to kind of do that with this like imaginary pink light. So I'm going to raise the dimmer. We're going to make it brighter. Look what's happening to the pink. Look at this. So it's like lighter pink, white. Eventually it will get to the point where the pink gets so bright that you start to get enough of the other colors and it becomes white. We get all the visible colors together in the spectrum. So it's still pink, it's just a really bright version of pink. It looks white, even though it's emitting pink light. But this is an emissive material right now. Yep, a lot of things will turn to white if you make them bright enough. The only case where they don't turn to white with intensity is if you get an extremely saturated color. Like it is very, very rich. And the reason for that is because very saturated colors, usually one or two of the color channels are really low, like in this case green, and no matter how bright you make it, it's just not enough to ever boost the green up to the point where it hits 1 or turning to white. So saturation, it will have a huge effect on if a color will ever actually hit white. It's pretty cool stuff. All right, let's get rid of that. I'm going to show you the other way you guys are doing it. Thank you guys for bearing with me on this. This is a new lecture. I usually haven't done this one. So we're going to click on this. Let's do it the material way. This time I'm going to assign a Pixar surface, and we're going to call this emission. Okay, so here's our emission material. Now, if you want to do it through the look of the material, that's also possible. Right, yes. Yep, that is normal. So it's because when you're looking directly at the light, it is a white color, but because the reflection is actually darker than the original. It's almost like when you look directly at something, you're seeing it at its max value. But when you look at the object off a reflection, remember the reflection is changing the appearance of it because some of that color in the reflection is being absorbed and you don't get all of it back. So it went back to pink because you're seeing the loss of that energy where the white got dimmed down, bouncing off the reflection of the material. It got knocked down dark enough to the point where it went back to pink, and then we saw the pink in the reflection. Hopefully that makes sense the way I'm explaining it. But yes, that is completely normal. It all depends what the surface is it's reflecting off of. If it's not a mirror, it will darken that down, and you'll probably see it start to get back to that original color again in the reflection. So with this one, what I'm going to do with the emission is we're going to go down, we're going to kill diffuse completely. Let's do our crop one more time. We're going to go in there, turn crop off, come way down here, and there actually is a section that you can do a really, really primitive version of emission called glow. This is it. There's not much to it. It's like, how bright do you want it? What's the color? I mean, we're talking to like the most simple section of the whole material. I want it set to 1, and then I'm going to pick, we'll just do the pink again. Done. Now, you can tell it is emitting color because like it's bouncing off it. The issue with doing it through a material is it's sometimes really tricky to get this to look the right way and still emit light properly. So sometimes what you can do in a situation like this is I can trick it. This is actually what you guys are doing in week 4, is we're going to trick this to working, where I'm going to take the light and we're actually going to move it. I don't know if it's actually sitting over the sphere. I'm kind of guessing it is because I don't want to move my camera right now to look. I'm putting the light around it, and I'm going to pick the same pink. So what we're doing is we're using the material to get the look of the object that's emitting the light. Like, 'cause you want to see the light source, but I'm using a spherical Pixar light to control the actual light emitting from the surface. So it's almost like we're breaking it up into two things: what the light source looks like when you look at it, and then the light that we made is us getting a little bit of extra control to emit the light with the same color, so we can kind of like get that balance of the way it looks and the way it emits with two separate controllers. So we're just kind of being a little clever to give like us more artistic control, basically. And I'm going to show you one more thing. I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent. I want to show you one kind of cool thing here with a glow. Let me show you I don't know if I'm going to be able to find the right type of image for this. This is just kind of cool. I don't want to see. Oh, this is actually pretty good. Okay. So you know how, like, when you look at a light source in the center, it's like that white, and then it kind of like makes a gradient to the other color on the outside? This is actually what makes it look like it's bright. You get the gradient, right? White gradiating to that like other color on the outside. This isn't doing that, right? That's a flat color. This is a much more advanced trick, and I'm going to do it for you guys in the recording. And if you guys can pull it off in the activity, I would love to see it next week. I'm not expecting you to do it, but I just kind of want to do this just to show it to you. I'm going to make this a bit bigger so you can see this. Let's just hide the light for a second. Okay. I'm going to go into the Hypershade for just a minute. Okay, we're going to go to, I'm going to go to find my material, here's my mission. I'm going to right click, Graph Network. So I'm just looking at the material. This is super basic. It's like, yay, there's a material. There's no textures. I've only done a few things in Glow and nothing else. This is about as simple as we can get. Now, there's a really cool thing you can do where you can actually trick this into being brighter on the edge. There's a way to do it with something called fuzz, and I can also trick it with a ramp. I'm going to show you the old school way, and then I'm going to show you the fuzz way as well. Down here, I'm going to do tab. I'm going to type in ramp texture. And I'm making what's called a ramp texture. A ramp is like a gradient. You guys have probably made these in Photoshop before at some point. There's like a gradient tool by the paint bucket. It's just a 2D gradient. And I'm going to make another node called sampler info. Actually, I haven't done this in a bit. Sampler info node. This is a very weird utility node that does a bunch of kind of cool things. What we're going to do is delete this guy, and I'm going to connect this thing into the ramp using some pretty simple connections. I'm going to click on the white, and I'm going to do something called facing ratio to, if I can get it to open up, to V coordinate. This is like an old school trick we used to do years ago, and you'll see why in just a second. Actually, let me keep this off first because I want you to see what the ramp looks like before I do that. Let's put the color in Glow color. Let's see if I can find it. It's buried in here somewhere. Actually, you know what? Let's just connect it this way because I don't want to go looking for it. There we go. Okay. I'm going to go to the ramp and we'll just make this pink just like it was before, like that. Okay, we should be able to see this. You should see this gradient on the surface. Yeah, you can. Let me move these together a little bit so you can see it. So you guys probably already kind of get a rough idea of what's happening. See how this it's black at the bottom. It's kind of making a gradient to the top where it's like the lighter pink. It's a ramp. It's just like the gradient tool in Photoshop. But this doesn't really feel like a light source. Now the reason I'm using this is because there's a thing you can do with this other guy if we connect it in where it completely changes the way this works. I'm going to hit the white dot and do facing ratio to V coordinate. Oops, come on. There we go. And it's a little hard to see. Oh, actually I might have to redo the render. Hopefully this still works. I don't think it's actually working for some reason. This might have been a colossal waste of time. I haven't done this in a while, and it could be that maybe this thing doesn't work like it's supposed to anymore. Or the RenderMan tool doesn't read it like it's supposed to. Well, that stinks. It used to work. Weird. I'll have to look into that. I don't think RenderMan knows what to do with this thing. That's all right. Scrap that. Let's do it the other way. Basically what it's supposed to do is when you pick a color, I can make it brighter on the edge from the center. We'll do this the other way. We're going to do Glow. We're going to come into Fuzz, and we're going to bump this guy up. And I'm going to pick white. This thing actually, if I get it right, if you look at the edge, I can get it to make the edge have a brighter color. We're just going to bump this gain up quite a bit. Yeah, there we go. That's pretty close to what I wanted to do. I'm just doing it with the material. I was kind of hoping that other trick was going to work because I have a lot more control with it. But now what I'm getting, I have to flip it because it's the wrong way. I'm sorry, this would actually be the pink. On the outside, this would be white. There we go. Yeah, we're getting there. There it is. Yep. So you can see we're almost getting like that like darker center. Actually, I had it, oh my god, I had it right the other way, didn't I? You know what I'm trying to do. It should have been white in the middle, pink on the outside. I just flipped it again, like by mistake. But you can kind of use fuzz and this guy to like control the gradient from the center to the outside to get some pretty interesting effects where it looks like it's glowing. And I just flipped it backwards again the wrong way. Oops. I'll just play around with that. I might do another video for you guys later just as an extra thing and send it to you if I can figure out why that's not working, because I haven't done this in a couple of years and I'm not sure why it broke, but we'll figure that out later. All right. Anyway, let's really quickly. I just want to show you kind of what you're doing real fast for that activity, and we'll get you guys out of here. This will be super quick. Because we've already covered enough with glass, and the videos are pretty good, where I don't think you guys are going to run into too many issues with it, but I just want you to be aware of what you're doing. So here is where you guys left off last week. Okay. So before, you guys had something kind of similar to this, where you had like different textures you've made, on the wall, the pedestal, the balcony. You're doing a bunch of really cool stuff. And then what you're doing this week is adding glass. So you can see that you're doing the glass bottles just like we did earlier, and I have videos that will pretty much walk you through it. You're going to pick your own colors. There's a few things that I do in the video where we give the glass a waviness. It's a little hard to see. See how there's like some bends in the glass where it's like distorted? There's one of the videos I show you how to connect a texture into the bump. It's kind of like the normal map thing you guys did, but you're doing it all in Maya, where you're going to make the glass look like there's a waviness to the surface to get a slightly different look. But you can pick your own color. You're going to be able to do your own gemstones. I'm just going to let you guys have fun with that, figure out what colors you want to do. You can look up cool reference for this, like rubies, emerald, amethyst, topaz, whatever you want to do, diamond, onyx. They don't have to be transmissive surfaces for all of it. If you want to play around with like subsurface scatter, you want to make some of them metallic, I'm cool with that too. Have a blast, do whatever you want for those guys. And the windows are on a display layer. So if you probably have already noticed it in your scene, but there's a display layer in the bottom right corner of Maya, like down. It's not in this. It's going to look gray. It's going to block your light. But as soon as you put the glass material on the windows, you will be able to see through it. Now, because you're adding glass, and you're also going to get the ability to add lights, you might want to consider opening up the shutters with groups. You can do interior lighting, open things up a little bit. Here's another one I did where I have like some really cool like cyan, kind of like teal lights on the outside, creepy green lighting interior, some intense light from above coming down. I did another one where there's a lot of reds, little red accent over here in the top right. This one's kind of cool too because I left the doors closed and I have the light right back here off to the screen. You can't really see it because it's hidden behind the wall, but it's really close casting out, and I kind of like I was able to get some of the shadow lines from the door right on the side of the pillar. So I really just want you guys to have fun and play around with the lighting. Look up some cool color palettes, find some reference, think about the textures you already have, and you might be able to come up with some really nice ideas on like how you want to design between the textures and the lights. This is where I think you may want to go back to some textures and do a couple minor adjustments to get the right look, because you don't want to overwhelm it with too many colors. Like, keep it simple, think of where you want to put your accents, and then kind of start fleshing out your ideas. But that's pretty much what you're doing this week. Nothing too crazy. I think that's it, guys. I know we didn't get actually into the project, but we did cover quite a bit just with the discussion, talking about the different material properties, what the Pixar surface is doing. Hopefully this is pretty helpful for everybody. And if you guys have any questions about the activity, just hit me up on Discord. I'll go into a bit more detail with you. But that's pretty much it. And then next week, I'm pretty excited because I'm going to be going over Painter with you guys, which I'm very pumped about. Painter is a really cool texturing program. It's kind of like Photoshop, but like way better. We're going to be bringing in a couple objects into Painter. I just want to introduce you to the software. We'll do I'll have you guys kind of give me a couple suggestions on different presets you want me to see put on it. We'll add rust, beat the hell out of things, dent some metals, and get you guys excited about that one. But you're going to be using Painter in digital painting too. So week 4 is just going to be the first time you guys see it. And then at the end of week 4, you're just kind of wrapping this thing up with a couple other objects and turning into your final and just basically breaking down how you built it from start to scratch. Kind of like a mini demonstration on like how you guys progressed through the activity. All right. I feel like I need like a throat lozenge. Like I had 2 lectures back to back. That was brutal. All right, guys. I appreciate everybody hanging out. I'm going to send everybody the live session. Hit me up on Discord, one-on-one. I'll send you guys the recording for any of the other classes if you guys need it. All right, guys. Everyone have a good night, and I will catch up with you guys either tomorrow or maybe next week.